All right, friends, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from in the world. Welcome to this month's Curious and Quirky, the podcast that unpacks innovation, pokes at conventional wisdom, and occasionally forgets where the box even was before we thought outside of it. This isn't your grandpa's leadership podcast, right? Though if he was anything like today's trailblazers, he probably would have invented the podcast just to flip the script. Now, each month we gather the brilliant and bold and slightly rebellious minds of the Caltech executive education to explore what leaders and teams mostly get right and what we can all learn from the glorious chaos when they don't. Now, this Memorial Day, we're tipping our helmets to the courageous, the ones who act when the path isn't clear, who innovate under pressure, and who know that boldness isn't always loud, but it always leads. So grab your coffee or your iced lemonade of liberty or whatever fuels your inner rebel, and let's get curious and maybe just a little bit quirky. All right, so this month we're going to start off with our AI guru, Brian Matamore. As we reflect on courage, creativity, and even rising to the moment, we're joined by someone who helps teams unlock their full potential when it matters the most. Now, Brian Matamore is the co-founder of the Growth Engine Company, author of many best-selling books, especially a couple written completely by AI, which is fascinating, and a go-to expert for helping companies innovate under pressure. He's worked with some of the biggest names across industries to turn brainstorms into bottom-line results. And if innovation had a boot camp, Brian would be the drill officer, the drill sergeant, pushing teams to think differently, take creative risks, and come out stronger on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Matamore.
Well, gee, thank you, Tim, for that creative and not even quirky introduction. Gosh, I really appreciate it. All the years we've been doing this Curious and Quirky podcast, I realized that we never have addressed probably the most important element of curiosity, which is what? Asking questions, right? And so I thought I should talk a little bit about that. In our work, as Tim mentioned, we have a bunch of techniques we use for reframing and getting entirely new ideas, questioning assumptions, 20 questions, problem redefinition. But I thought I would go into this a little deeper and actually talk about a creativity technique that I invented. It's more of a training tool that I invented many, many years ago. And I wanted to bring that back because it has relevance now, certainly in the AI world in terms of prompting, right? So I think I'll kick this off by just the Einstein quote, which many of I'm sure have heard, but he had said the important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing, which of course ties questions and curiosity. Okay, so let me tell you what this training technique was that I invented many years ago. And there's a wrinkle to it. So stay with me as I work through this. I called it the gray box technique. I wrote about it in my very first book, 99% Inspiration. And I wanted to give the audience member or the workshop attendee an experience of sort of continued questioning, because one question is fine, but you really want to push to ask more and more and more questions. And, in the focus group moderation world, gosh, I remember I was with somebody, a co-moderator one time. She asked why like 4 or 5 times. I wanted to kill her. It's like, let's move on here. But by the fourth why, we actually got some very interesting stuff. So that's in part what this creative device training tool, whatever you want to call it, is. So it's called the gray box technique. I'll tell you what it was. I would walk out in the audience with an actual gray box, and inside I would tell them that inside was one of my game inventions, which I had actually licensed to the Games Gang, the Pictionary people. They paid me an option fee, but they never marketed it, unfortunately, because they had a management change. And so this was an invention that they had never heard of in the box. And so what I did with them, I said, let's play 20 questions. It has to be yes, no, and see if you can guess what's inside the box. And then to add the pressure for the adults, I said, and by the way, 4th graders came up with the answer. Okay, just by their questions. Okay, so they ask all these questions, and you can imagine some were like, is there? I'll read. I have a verbatim transcript of one time I did this. Is there a board in the game? No. Is there a ball? No. Are there pieces? Yes. Are there dice? No. Are there cards? Yes. Do cards have pictures on them? Yes. I should probably say this slower because one of the important points here is the more questions you ask, this thing, these thought experiments, if you will evolve in your mind, right? You're starting to get a visual image of what this game invention could be. Is it a puzzle? No. Are there, let's see, are there more than cards in there? Yes, there are. Do you wind up with a three-dimensional thing? Oh my gosh, now we're really getting there, right? Um, are all the additional pieces used to put the cards together to make them stand up in 3 dimensions? Yes. Wow, we're really getting there. And I'll skip ahead here. Are all the players trying to make the exact same structure? No. Are you building up a skyscraper, maybe more freeform? Yes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And you probably have a sense of what this thing could be. Is there a structure you're trying to complete? Are you using the designs on each card to create a final structure? Yes. Is each player trying to form a different structure? Yes. And so you get the idea, right? You get these cards or stuff on the table, and you have to create your sort of architectural design here using the pieces. So that was, and there's more to the actual game. They got, in this particular case, they got it in 57 yes/no questions. Okay. By the way, percentage-wise, about 40% of the questions had a no, and about 60% had a yes. And that's been consistent when I've done this several times. By the way, when I did it with the kids, just so you know, it was cute what they came up with. There was a sort of a card game to learn about the biographies of famous people. And so on one side of the card was a strawberry, on the other side was a picture and bio of Darryl Strawberry, or a Bush, George Bush, Sally Field, etc. So it's cute and fun, right? Okay, so here's the wrinkle that I wanted to share with you guys. The wrinkle is, yes, my game invention was inside this box, but no, I was not answering questions based on what was inside the box. Okay, I was randomly answering, semi-randomly answering these questions, and I showed him what was in the box. You know, this is deceptive, but I showed him what was in the box, but I said, no, I was just randomly answering questions. So, audience, by virtue of your questions, you have created a new game. And so that was, everybody goes, whoa, okay, that's pretty powerful. And there are a couple of important takeaways here. Number one, if you look at the lives of great inventors, you will see that behind it all, they kind of know there's an answer, right? You keep asking questions to get more and more possibilities, more and more thought experience. In this case, they knew where there was an answer, so they kept going for it. There is the evolving visual, which I talked about. And finally, I think there's a desire for synthesis. As you're hearing these things, you're trying to integrate them in your mind. And I think that's a good example of how the inventive mind works. Okay, so I'm going to close this thing out by mentioning and hopefully bringing it up to date now with AI. All right. Could you play this technique with AI? And it turns out you can. You can tell AI, hey, I've got this game invention. See if you can figure out what it is. And again, randomly answer those questions. And I will tell you, I did this for the first time a few days ago, and I was shocked what came out of it. Now I'm, creative and good at integrating things, but the idea that came out of it was so good that I'm not going to tell you what it was, because I think I may go do it, frankly. So I'll leave you curious, and hopefully that's not too quirky. But that's what I wanted to share with you guys. And the takeaway for you guys is you can do this with your team. Bill Gordon, who founded Synectics, would sometimes bring in challenges and not tell them who the client was or what area the challenge was in. So you can ask your team, if you have a supply chain challenge with Alan, for instance, you can say, I got this great supply chain idea. Let's write down all your questions and see if you can guess what it is. And of course, it's the questions themselves that are very provocative, because you could have someone that says, for instance, could we do a joint venture to do the supply chain better? Well, maybe that's something you never thought of, and that's something you could pursue. So doing this technique will allow you to come up with new ways of framing, new ways of thinking, and new paths you can go down that you might not have thought of otherwise. All right. So hopefully I'll get to say more about this when we all get together back as a group. But now, time-wise, I want to send it on to Tom. Tom is a good friend. He's with Mary Abazia, also a good friend. They're Caltech experts in marketing and really segmentation. And so Tom, is that a good enough intro this on Memorial Day? He's a hero. I'll say he's a marketing hero. How's that? Is that
Oh,
enough of a connection?
that's awesome. And I am going to talk about segmentation. And Brian, you are the Daryl Strawberry of innovation. I just tell you that.
Thank you.
All right. So what I'm going to talk about today is this marketing phenomenon called one product, many jobs. When Amazon announced it would pause new vendor contracts across many divisions in early 2025, it sent a clear message. Even the world's most dominant companies are under pressure to consolidate, streamline, extract more value from fewer vendor relationships. And they're not alone. According to a Gartner survey, 68% of B2B buyers say they plan to reduce their supplier count this year, not just to save money, but to simplify operations, reduce risk, and focus on solutions that solve multiple problems at once. That's not just a procurement trend, it's a psychological shift. Decision makers are tired. Procurement leads, department heads, operators all suffer from something we call value optimization fatigue. They're overwhelmed with choices, skeptical of new vendors, and loyal to partners who make their lives easier. They want one solution, one invoice, one partner who can deliver across a spectrum of needs. The most honest ones admit they would like one throat to choke is one of the terms that we hear. So that's why multifunctionality, providing multi-use products and wide-ranging value propositions really matters today, and why so many smart B2B firms are leaning into it. Let me be clear, whether you're adding functionality to a product or layering services onto a product, you're playing the same strategic card. You're making what you already sell more valuable to the people already buying it. Just a few more stats about why that makes great business sense. According to Bain and Company, just a 5% increase in customer retention can increase your profits by up to 95%. Selling more to existing customers not only costs less than acquiring new ones, it also boosts loyalty and reduces price sensitivity. I could give you more stats, but you get the idea. Now, we've already seen this multifunctional phenomena in the industrial categories. For example, smart glass on buildings that darkens on demand, collects solar energy, and also serves as a display on the inside or the outside. Or conveyor systems that not just scan items, but they sort them and adapt as needed. Even packaging that tracks freshness and talks to your inventory systems. This is multi-use, multifunctional value propositions in the B2B world. But it's not just about products. You can add services like analytics dashboards to your products, training, remote monitoring. There's one key, though, to conceiving these types of ideas for your existing product. And it's going to be the thing that Brian said Mary and I are experts in, needs-based segmentation. It's an underutilized strategy. See, most of you are segmenting your customer base, but not in the way that I want to talk about. Let me illustrate what needs-based segmenting is via an example. Let's say you're in the CT scanner medical device market. Now, many companies in this industry will segment hospitals, who are their customers, by size or geography. For example, they might have a segment called large urban hospitals and another one called small rural operations. That's not needs-based. That's just where they are and how big they are, because not all large urban hospitals have the same needs. Segmenting the old way might help with logistics, pricing, other things, but it doesn't help you and it doesn't inspire multifunction value proposition ideas. It gets infinitely easier to do this stuff and be creative when you try segmenting based on needs. For example, picture this segment: hospitals that are operationally focused, looking to reduce costs and improve efficiency. And here's another one, completely different segment, a hospital that's patient experience driven aiming to boost patient satisfaction and reputation, even if it requires higher costs. Okay, you get the idea. Two different needs-based segments. Now, let's think about multi-use, multi-function products for the CT scan industry for each of these segments. For the operational segment, they want to lower costs. Imagine enhancing the CT scanner with an auto scheduling integration to reduce idle time, or AI-driven protocols that lower technician training requirements and scan time. For the patient experience segments, imagine bundling like soundproofing kits and aesthetic enclosures to reduce patient anxiety. Remember, they're all about the patient experience, along with post-scan educational tools for patients and families. These are real innovations, not from changing the product entirely, but from seeing it through this different lens. And you won't get there by classifying accounts as large, urban, or small, rural. You get there by understanding how businesses plan to make money by understanding their needs. So here's the message. In a market that demands more, it's time to give your products more jobs. That doesn't just mean building in more tech or gadgets. It means listening closely, segmenting wisely, and imagining new ways to serve. Whether it's an extra feature, an unexpected service, the strategy is the same. Help what you already sell do more for those who already trust you. One product, many jobs. That's not just innovation, it's a smart way to grow in today's world. So now I'm going to hand it over to the Caitlin Clark of organizational change, Ginny Ertl. You like that,
Oh my
Ginny?
goodness.
Does that work for
Oh
you?
my goodness. Thank you, Tom. Well, I'm going to talk about a very important process and one of the most important process for leaders, and that is the decision-making process and what we can learn from the papal conclave. So last week, the papal conclave of 133 cardinals from around the world gathered in the Sistine Chapel on Wednesday, May 7th, to elect the new pope. By Thursday, May 8th, after just 2 days and 5 rounds of voting, Pope Leo XIV was elected the first American pope. So what is most understood about this process is how the results of each voting session are communicated to the world via a plume of smoke. Once the cardinals close themselves in the Sistine Chapel so that voting can begin, the chimney of the Capitol releases of the chapel releases a plume of white smoke if the Pope has been chosen, or black smoke if no candidate has won the required 2/3 majority votes, and in this case, 89 votes. Those of us who watched the film Conclave may feel we have additional insight into the voting process. However, what I found most curious and quite frankly remarkable about the process is that without months and months of campaigning and debating, over 89 of the 133 cardinals from around the world were able to agree on who should be the next pope, and they did it in less than 2 days. So this leads me to talk about one of the most important responsibilities of leadership, and that is the decision-making process. Some of you may be thinking, well, that's easy. I'm a leader, so whatever I say goes. I make the decisions and everyone should follow. Others of you may be thinking, I don't make one decision without consulting my team first. And so it goes. So what's the right way? Well, I want to start by saying this is a challenge that frequently comes up in my executive coaching sessions, and I've been coaching executives for decades. So this is what I hear. I don't understand how decisions are getting made, and I have to support these decisions whether I agree with them or not. And some others may say, everything is consensus. We never agree on anything and nothing gets done. So my response is this: decision-making is a process. And there are 4 steps that leaders need to follow in this decision-making process. The first is to understand the decision-making techniques, and I'm going to share 5 of them. The second step is to select the right technique for the nature of the decision that's being made. And there are 2 variables in a decision: the time you have to make the decision and the buy-in you need for that decision to be successful. The third step in the decision-making process is to communicate it to the people impacted, the people involved, your key stakeholders. Communicate to everyone how you're going to be making these decisions. And the fourth and last step is to tell these key stakeholders what the decision was and why. So these are pretty logical and simple, but it's very rare to see these steps followed. So let me start with sharing these decision-making techniques. And as I had said, the techniques are a function of 2 variables: the time you have to make the decision and the buy-in you need to make the decision for it to be successful. So I'm going to give you kind of a brief description on each without going into so much detail, but just kind of give you a sense of what these decision-making techniques are. So the first is decide and announce. The leader makes the decision without consulting the team. And this is appropriate when there's not a lot of time and you don't need a lot of buy-in. Example would be, the building's on fire, leave. So that would be decide and announce. The next is delegate and accept. And that's when the leader actually identifies maybe a member of the team or the team itself to make the decision. And whatever gets decided is the decision. The third technique is consult and announce. The leader makes the decision after consulting with individuals or the entire team. Consult and announce is where things get misunderstood mostly. Because if someone's been consulted and they have an opinion, they think, well, my opinion is going to be the decision. And when it's not the decision, they don't feel good about the decision. But if they knew that they were just providing data and the leader makes the decision, they'd feel better about it. The fourth is voting, and that's when the group decides in a voting process. And the fifth is consensus. A decision is made where everyone accepts the decision. And so this is at the end of the continuum, where we saw decide and announce, least time, least buy-in. The consensus takes the most time, but you do get the most buy-in. So let's return to the conclave as an example of this process. So as far as the conclave, the decision-making process used is majority vote and is understood by all key stakeholders, not only the cardinals, but the world. And this technique takes into the consideration the need and buy-in from all the stakeholders, the cardinals and the 1.3 billion Catholics that they represent. And the results of this decision is widely communicated to the world via a plume of smoke, either black or white smoke. So really the closing line here is, we know that the focus is always on making the right decision, yet we cannot lose sight of the process to get us there. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alan Dunn, who is our guru and hero and all those words on, on supply chain. So take it away, Alan.
Well, thank you, Jenny. I'm so glad that you talked about leaders and coaching, and because today I want to talk a little bit about what's going to have the largest impact on global supply chain over the next, decade or so. And in fact, it's going to be the leaders and champions in the manufacturing, distribution, and logistics industries that are going to probably make those changes. So, if I look at supply chain, if anybody looks at global supply chains, one has to first take the politics out of the discussion today, because as we all know, there's tons of discussions about tariffs and duties and other sort of import and export restrictions. So we have to take that out and kind of look dispassionately at supply chain history and current facts. Now, part of supply chain management is procurement. That is the function inside of a company where they buy things to convert and or to distribute. And a large part of purchasing things is negotiations. Now, I've watched master negotiators over the last 40 years. I myself have mastered many, though probably not all, negotiating skills. I know something about negotiating. Even out of college, I wanted to work for the National Mediation and Reconciliation Service. This is the organization that settles national strikes that could impact the whole economy, not just the US, but globally. In my negotiations class in college, I had a requirement to go to a high-end store, Neiman Marcus or Saks Fifth Avenue, and actually negotiate across the counter for something normally isn't done in those kinds of stores, and just not accept the sticker price. By the way, I successfully negotiated 20% off of a leather briefcase that I could barely afford, and that was at Saks Fifth Avenue. So one of the things I learned about negotiating from watching these experts and a little bit of my own experience is that in negotiations, ambiguity is not a bug, it's leverage. And in a recent Bloomberg article, I think it was John Carney probably wrote this. He writes for Bloomberg and also Breitbart and a number of others. He said something that was really interesting. He said, I can't recall the last time when so many people around the world were waiting for a White House announcement where no one seems to know exactly what's going to be announced. So some would say that's chaos. If I look at this dispassionately, that's not chaos. In the negotiating world, that's called choreography. Like the man and his administration or not, whether you like him or not, there's a learning moment here. Even President Trump's critics will admit that he's a showman at heart. I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And once again, he has turned policy into a primetime show. This is probably part of the salesman's instincts, part negotiator tactic, and probably wholly consistent with the idea that America has not been treated fairly in global trade and needs to reclaim its supply chain base. Certainly, we saw in the pandemic a problem with global supply chains when the N95 masks weren't available in some parts because they were mostly made in China. And this goes on and on. So the question is what's going to change over the next 10 years in the realm of global supply chains and what impacts these changes? Well, the answer is everything. And the reason it's everything is because now we have the whole issue of the restrictions of global supply chain on the table. Nevertheless, I see four items that are going to be, or four areas that are going to change. One, there's going to be a shift away from focusing from companies, particularly manufacturing companies, focusing on low-cost labor to focusing on adoption and implementation of technology. This technology will be the automation of warehouses, which is a bastion for labor. And by the way, you can't take that to China. You can't take that to Vietnam. You can't take that to India because distribution has to happen where the customers are. And so it's automation of warehouses, logistics, and factory automation, automation of routine supply chain research. That is the data analysis that has to go to make decisions. And then, of course, the automation of the actual routine decision making. We'll talk in a minute about the enabling technologies. Also, there's going to be a huge development on developing, huge focus on developing workforces to operate the new technologies to make that prior item happen. Training will be a big topic in companies, in all the distribution, logistics, and manufacturing companies. And by the way, just to end the argument, training is going to largely be digitally enabled. There'll still be classes, there'll still be formal venue-based sessions, but largely it's going to move towards digital. So we need to get our digital technologies in order. The third thing that's going to change is that focus will be on protection of crucial supply chains to support national defense and citizens' well-being. When I'm done with this, I'll put in the questions. I'll put a link to an article we wrote, a research project we did that resulted in an article about sovereign supply chains. I'll put that in the link for y'all to read. And then the fourth thing is the realignment of global sourcing driven by the new trade rules that are being sledgehammered by the Trump administration. Again, be dispassionate about this, whether we like the approach or don't like the approach, it's going to have some consequences. Now, the Association of Supply Chain Management talks about the top 5 impactants that are going to drive all of this or be driven by it in some cases. One is the use of big data and AI. The advancements here, particularly in the supply chain analysis and research areas, and also in the subsequent automation of decision making, of routine decision making, I should say, is going to be driven by these technologies, which are advancing at an enormously different and faster rate than in the past. This is going to lead to the building of agile and resilient networks, which is going to cause the complete rethinking of inventory deployment and where it should be deployed. The third is going to be the multi-echelon digital integration and connectivity. That is the ability for an auto company to see all the way down to the rubber plantation that produces the latex that goes into tires, and know what was put on those rubber trees or what pesticides were sprayed. I mean, that complete multi-level sort of supply chain visibility is going to be a reality. It's already partially a reality in the food supply chains. Strategic sourcing and supplier management is going to be the fourth big driver. That is, and a lot of that is actually bringing products back closer to the markets. In other words, making them closer to the markets. Delayed manufacturing until the time of use. And then the workforce evolution and development, which I talked about a little bit ago. So tariffs are going to result in a global shift in sourcing, which in turn, I believe, will accelerate development and automation of advanced technologies serving the manufacturing, distribution, and logistics functions. I predict that we will see, as a result of the tariff argument, that one of the consequences of that will be the greatest leap in industrial technology than we've ever seen. And this is going to come from those tariffs, because as we bring things back to the US, we have to increase technology-driven productivity by about 6x to compensate for the labor differentials and the taxing differentials of other countries. So on the global economics behind President Trump's Liberation Day, the case for this Liberation Day is actually pretty straightforward. And I want you to consider Europe's value-added tax, or VAT, regime. So for example, a German automaker exporting a car to the US does so tax-free, thanks to the VAT rebate. An American automobile maker shipping a car to Europe pays embedded US taxes and a European VAT upon entry. So Germany enjoys a de facto export subsidy. The other, US, in this case, faces a tax wall. And the World Trade Organization, in its infinite wisdom, has allowed this disparity to continue and continues to block America's access to a lot of these foreign markets. The math is the math on this one. Whether we like the policies or the policymakers, the math is the math. Tariffs, it turns out, are really the only instrument left that isn't prohibited by the rules of games, supply chain games, that are almost designed. You would swear if you looked at them that you would say they're designed to make America lose in the global trade wars. For example, we even think a tariff of 25% on European goods, and a lot of Trump advisors have suggested this, we don't think that's actually punitive. We think it's compensatory. It would account for the embedded tax burden of American producers that they face, neutralize Europe's VAT advantage, and most importantly, do what every past effort has failed to do. It would send a signal that the playing field is about to be leveled. So in a sense, the old orthodoxy is dead. We have to start thinking about, going forward, what are we going to do and how are we going to use tariffs and how long are we going to use tariffs? Tariffs are not supposed to be a forever thing. The critics oftentimes invoke the Smoot-Hawley argument, saying that it actually created the Depression. It didn't create the Depression. It turns out the Great American Depression of 1929 was maybe delayed a little bit, but it wasn't created by tariffs. In fact, if you take a look at the greatest industrial expansion in the U.S. happened under high tariff regimes. And so I don't personally think that's a good argument. So I don't see Liberation Day as the beginning of a trade war. I see it as kind of trying to end the trade war. It's really long overdue. It's not a sometimes you just can't say words. It's not designed to provoke. It's the recognition that economic war long ago was declared, and not by the U.S., but by a number of other countries and the World Trade Organization. So we need to be thinking seriously about how to wrap this up, how to increase the adoption of automation technologies, AI technologies, all the big data opportunities, the multi-echelon systems, because with those, we can bring a lot of manufacturing back closer to the customers. And in our case, it's back to the United States. With that, I'd like to thank you all for listening to that. I would like to turn you over to our coach and to our leader, sometimes known as the Vin Scully of Curious and Quirky, to Tim.
All right. Hey, thanks so much. All right. So I appreciate all the talks. I just love hosting this podcast because we have such a variety of topics. And when people find out that I'm hosting a podcast, I always say that I'm kind of the wild card, and I talk about very different things sometimes. And so today I'm going to do just that. I'm going to talk about something in somewhat of the leadership vein, but I'm going to ask you a question to steal from Jenny's format from last month. Is what do a gardener, a gentleman, a delusional knight, and a witty heroine have in common? It's really just going to be a masterclass in leadership served with a side of fiction. So let's be honest, right? Sometimes when you think about leadership keynotes or any other discussions that you might hear from someone on a stage, it sounds typically like maybe a reheated TED Talk, if you will. They don't sound sincere. They're typically filled with buzzwords. In my experience, they're not always grounded in reality. And I think some of the best discussions are grounded in some form of reality and not focused solely on academic ideas. Anyone ever played buzzword bingo in those discussions? You get strategy, you get grit and emotional intelligence and yada, yada, yada. We all know the words, we've seen the slides, but do we really feel those words that those people offer? Now, what if just for a moment, we look for leadership lessons not from necessarily the C-suite, but in the stories that have shaped our imaginations throughout our lives? What if we traded all these buzzwords that we continuously hear for bookshelves? Oddly enough, the bookshelf is behind me, and explored what it means to lead by seeing the world from the unlikely lens of literary characters. Now, because here's the truth, fiction doesn't just entertain. In my belief, it teaches. And some of the best, I will say, or most even compelling stories that are quiet revolutionary leadership lessons are hiding simply in plain sight. And we have to look between the lines sometimes of the stories that you grew up with and maybe never even thought twice about. That was me up until about 5 years ago, until I started to reframe a lot of things that I had ever read before and started digging deeper into the stories that I grew up with. And I'll be honest, this has been a topic of mine that's been so fascinating to me. And this is the first time I'm having a chance to discuss it. That's forever changed my life. And so let's begin with one of my most favorite stories of all time, based in La Mancha, Spain. Now, this character is old, right? He's delusional. He likes to joust at windmills with a rusted sword and a head full of outdated chivalry. And yet there's something I will say deeply admirable about him, because unlike most leaders today, Don Quixote refuses to be bound by reality. He dares to dream. He sees the world how he wants to see it, not how other people tell him to see the world. He chooses to see giants where others see simple machinery. He chooses to see honor where others see humiliation. And he chooses to see possibilities when others see dead ends. And while the world laughs at him and at his posse, he charges ahead, undaunted, unashamed, and unrelenting. Some people call it madness, but you could also call it vision. In a risk-averse world that we have today, typically, Don Quixote reminds us that real leadership sometimes means believing in something that doesn't even yet exist and being bold enough to act like it already does. Then we shift over to a small town in Alabama. There's Atticus Finch, a man cut from a completely different cloth entirely. He has no illusions. He has no delusions. He just emanates quiet, principled courage. In a small town rotted by racism, Atticus stands alone in the courtroom, not because he expects to win, but because someone has to stand up for what they believe in. He doesn't stand to change the world, but he stands so that the world doesn't change him. He doesn't shout, he doesn't charm, he simply shows up and speaks the truth, and he teaches his children that real courage isn't a man with a gun. It's knowing that you've been licked before you begin and continuing to begin anyway. That's not heroism in, say, the overall cinematic sense, right? But it's the kind that really pushes you forward that sometimes it can kind of hurt, right? It can isolate you. It demands moral clarity when there's this fog of war, this fear that's surrounding you and taking you over. Now, leadership like Atticus Finch doesn't beg for recognition. He doesn't do it for the title or the recognition. He simply says, what is the right thing to do here, and then does it, regardless of what the consequences may be. So when you think about leadership in general, not all leadership, though, is about charging or challenging those around you, charging into the unknown or challenging those with different opinions. Sometimes it's about carrying your side of the load. Now, one of my all-time favorite characters, Samwise Gamgee, the regular gardener we have here, I think personally he's probably the most underrated leader in all of Middle Earth. He isn't the ring bearer. He doesn't wield power, nor is he named in the songs of old. But when Frodo falters, Sam carries him. Literally, he hauls him up Mount Doom when every step feels like lifting a mountain. He fights off Shelob with nothing but more than his short sword and his sheer heart. He guards Frodo's body alone against the orcs of Cirith Ungol, refusing to abandon him even when he believes that he may be dead. He doesn't seek applause or any sort of attention. He seeks purpose. He leads by commanding others, but by refusing to, not by commanding others, but by refusing to let others fall and refusing to let the mission fail. Now, in a world of what I would call performative leadership, Sam's leadership is real. And I think that's one of the best qualities about Sam is that it's real, but it's quiet. It's relentless, it's consistent. Now, this is the kind that shows up in the rain with no credit, no cape, no fanfare. But this person is the person that'll stay until the job is done. They will be in the trenches with a team working until the sun comes up in the morning just to make sure you meet the deadline, you work through things. Now, one of my favorite scenes in Return of the King is a testament to Sam's character, right? Now, Sam is in his yard with his wife, Rosie, if you remember, and his kids, and they're spending time together. And it only solidifies that he really truly leads for love and family and not for glory and not for fame. He's not seeking a throne. He's not seeking anything else. He's doing it for those that he loves. You want loyalty, you can hire Samwise. You want greatness, follow him, watch him, and learn from him. Now, then comes the razor wit of Lizzie Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, right? Now, Lizzie Bennet moves through a world where women are expected to smile, nod, and marry well, preferably quickly and quietly. But Lizzie, she reads people like spreadsheets. She sizes up Mr. Darcy from day one. His pride in a single glance really dismantles, Mr. Collins' pompous proposal without really even breaking a sweat, and calls out Lady Catherine de Bourgh's condescension with razor-sharp politeness as well. She's not really a rebel, but she outmaneuvers those around her. She challenges the arrogant, parries with the charm, and even stays entirely to herself, even when it costs her her security, her reputation, or even the comfort of just simply going along for the ride. Again, similar to Samwise and other folks, her leadership isn't loud. It's very precise. It's very strategic. And it's leadership of knowing exactly who you are, even when the world tries to shrink you or put you into a box in a place where you can't do much and be an individual. It's the leadership of really saying no, while politely but firmly as well, whether in her case it was an unwanted marriage, social pressure, or even other expectations that she never agreed to. She never demands permission to lead her own life. She does it anyway. She simply lives it. She outsmarts a system that's built to limit her, and doing it with a smirk, a sparkle in her eye, and her dignity intact. And then when you think you've just kind of got leadership all figured out, you have to circle back because like I said, I love Samwise, so I'm going to go back, right? He definitely deserves, I will say, a second spotlight. He is the spotlight when everything goes dark. And at the very edge of this world, in the ash and choking despair, I would say, when they get to Mount Doom, he isn't armed with a battle plan. He isn't carrying titles or influence or grand speeches. He's carrying heart. And sometimes when every strategy fails or every strength crumbles, heart is the only fuel you really have left. Now, he shows us that something most leadership books forget. It's not about leading people when it's easy. It's about carrying the hope sometimes when others are too broken or too tired or too lost to carry it themselves. And sometimes it's simply just having a side conversation or even whispering to your team, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, and meaning every single word along with it. So when typically you think about leadership and power and things like that, when that power eventually fades, when plans fall apart, when the mountain feels insurmountable and way too steep to climb, real leadership looks like Samwise Gamgee. And sometimes that's enough to save the whole world. So throughout these stories that we've talked about, through the misfits, the dreamers, the rebels, and the quiet giants, we typically find a simple truth. Leadership isn't just charisma. It's not just a position or a power, things like that. It's not this polished illusion that everything is perfect and this person is a perfect person. It's sometimes real leadership is really delusion, but it's sharpened into direction or vision. It's conviction, sometimes worn like armor, even when the world tries to pierce it. And it's, I would say, authenticity, not as a performance per se, but as something with grit or with teeth, sharp enough to defend what matters. It's loyalty, it's fierce, it's, I don't know, unyielding when everything goes dark and you need to continue on your path. So when you think about all the stories you've read as a child, right, or even growing up, even through your life today, they're not really mere entertainment. They're test beds for courage, blueprints for resilience, and even maps that maybe are secret maps for you, but help you understand what true leadership actually is. And maybe, right, every leader, whether they know it or not, is writing a story too. And it's sometimes a story built choice by choice, maybe sacrifice by sacrifice, or even your belief system, belief by belief. So sometimes that story will either fade into the noise or it'll stand the test of time. So when your final chapter is being written, the only question that matters the most is not whether you led, but whether your story was worth following. So with that, we'll bring everyone back to the table. We have a couple minutes here to have some conversation, and I want to start it off actually with Alan. I had a question for you. Is you mentioned that that you think right now that this is the greatest expansion of the U.S. during tariff times, or that's when we typically had the expansion. But I guess what's my concern with this whole idea of expansion long term is that what if the next administration or the next leadership comes in and they completely derail the current tariff situation? What happens then to this continued expansion or this maybe opportunity for us to do that with this cyclical back and forth direction?
Yeah, great question. Well, first off, as I said, tariffs should not be forever. Tariffs are an artificial manipulation of the marketplace driven by national interests. And once those national interests are achieved, or it looks like they're being achieved, they should generally be removed. And smart companies, countries, and by the way, the U.S. has done this in the past on numerous occasions. So I'm hoping that by the time that certainly this administration is done, whether they're reelected or not, I think that 3 or 4 years, and I think most economists agree with this, that 3 or 4 years of realigning global trade will go a long way to causing it to self-stick for and can't just be easily adjusted. Look, it took us 50 years to get to this point. It could take another 20 to 50 years to undo it as well. So
that's true.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the areas where a single administration can make an enormous change in global trade. A lot of other things they can't. Certainly, they can't make those kinds of changes by going to war. We've seen that with the never-ending wars like Vietnam and others. And so, but this is a case where you can actually realign in a sense, the global economic order in a fairly short period of time.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I mean, I think I was just curious about that because seems that in today's world, right, it's kind of ping pong back and forth from time to time with, every 4 years something completely different changes, but that makes a lot of sense. And Ginny, I had a question for you actually. So one of the things I've been seeing a lot is, a lot of discussion out there. Obviously the conclave process, they, you kind of put it in the big picture perspective. They did everything in 2 days, but then you see all of these individuals out there who are maybe looking for a job, and they have maybe at a lower level of a corporation, but then they go through weeks of interview process. They're flown all over the country. They're meeting with the CEO, and then they say, oh, well, it's just not the right fit after, months of interviews. And it just, do you have any thoughts on that aspect of it versus, the whole world has elected a pope in 2 days, but some people can't even get a job after 6 weeks of flying around the
I,
world or a country.
I'm smiling because I think of all the broken processes out there, I think the hiring process is one of the
Sure.
most broken because of all the things you just mentioned. There's the decision process is not well understood or well communicated. Very rarely do they say, "Oh, we're going to make this decision in 2 weeks and you're going to hear from us." And it is one of these processes that has fits and starts and goes hot and cold. And there's so many unknowns for the poor person trying to get the
Yeah.
job that what ends up happening is, first of all, the person gets discouraged. If by some miracle they do get hired, they're not feeling great joining that particular company. And also that process is so externally focused that when it's not good, it does not bode well for the reputation of the company. It's
Mm,
such an important process, getting the right talent in, of course,
right.
and it's also doing that process well is also important for the brand of the company.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. I struggle with that sometimes where, senior leaders, I guess, in the company, executives even, right, are involved in hiring decisions, right? I mean, it's like asking, a senior executive to, decide about what new grad is going to come into their organization, right? It's, might as well just let the lower level leaders, figure that out as opposed to having the executives spend time figuring out and choosing entry level grads coming into, let's say, an organization. It's the same concept in general, but it can be discouraging, and I worry about that level of discouragement sometimes
Mhm.
with kind of going through such a rigorous and, I
Absolutely.
will say,
You can
demanding
lose
cycle.
great talent.
Yeah,
You
for
can lose
sure.
great talent with a bad process like that. And
Yeah,
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 and where should the decision making take place? Based
yeah,
on the position, the position, the decision making should be in the right place in the organization. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Hey,
Hey,
speak.
Tim, I wanted to say something about Alan's stuff, which I thought was fascinating. Gosh, I learned more in 10 minutes than I've learned in 5 years talking about supply chain with what he said. So thank you, Alan. It reminded me of a session I did for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And we had world-class experts from all the top organizations in this session. And we thought, frankly, it would be focused on technology, right? Sort of improving this way. But what we discovered in this session and what we really pursued was sort of the next level. And that next level was, what are all the services around these technologies that maybe even some of the entrepreneurs on this call could start to leverage what the technology is now giving us that. So I'll ask Alan to comment on that if he would.
Yes, a great example. My son actually called me last week and said, "Dad, if we're doing tariffs on products, why aren't we doing tariffs on services?" If you're a company, you have one of the big accounting firms doing your corporate taxes, almost certainly your corporate taxes are being done in India. And we actually have almost as many CPAs, US educated CPAs in India as we do here. And the same thing with radiology, reading X-rays and MRI scans and things like that. Uh, what's how technology is going to change that, we believe, is that technology makes you geographically neutral. You can have people almost anywhere. Now, what that means is that you also have data to protect. And so we see and with AI and some of the bot development of some accelerated or advanced bots, we can see a lot of that happening here. I'll give you a great example. Do this, Brian. You'll enjoy this. Go find a reason something's not shipped to you on time by Amazon. It's supposed to be for what Prime is a 2 day. They don't get it there for 5 days. Call them and say, look, I want some sort of payment from you or compensation for not getting it to me under the contractual period. And the person will probably negotiate and talk to you and offer you a $5. Go on and negotiate with a bot then, and you'll always do better with the bots than you do
Ah,
with a
ah,
person. I've done this like 10 different times just to see if it holds true. And so this is the advancement of the technologies and the communication technologies, particularly in customer service, in tax preparation, things like that, where now you don't have to actually have an Indian prepare the taxes for a U.S. company, it can actually be done automatically. I mean, literally, we're getting to the point where that can be done by a push button. And so, so I think that technology is in itself is going to tend to bring a lot of, it's going to redeploy assets around the globe. It's uncertain where those will all be redeployed, but some of them will definitely come back here.
Thanks, Alan. Really good. Tom, you had a question. I sort of interrupted you, or you had a comment.
This is something that I think any of you all can answer. I'm not going to answer because we all talk a little bit about AI, but it was from Alan's talk. The quote was AI for routine decision making.
Right.
And my question for anybody that wants to take it is, there's two questions. How do we define routine decision making? And isn't that the line that defines the future of humans' work?
Well, that's a great point. That's, so routine decision making is probably not going to be using generative AI as much as just what I call traditional AI, because it's algorithm based, and algorithms are rules or frame based sort of systems. And so, in supply chain, for example, you look at your stock status report, and it says you don't have any inventory. You look at the forecast; it says that the demand is going down, not up. And so, where AI can help is by reaching out and gathering a lot of disparate data and say, look, you probably need to have only 3 units of safety stock versus 12. So, in other words, it does what we've done on 35 spreadsheets. It does it in seconds, very quickly, and then. And of course, the next level is, well, then why don't you just let the computer make the decision and order the 3 pieces? And it's like, why don't you let the pilot land the plane automatically too? Now, I've been in a plane. I've sat in a cockpit of a plane that did land. We landed it automatically, and it was hands off the stick of the wheel. And I have to tell you something that bothered me, and I can imagine that if there was anybody in the back of the plane, it would have bothered them too. So I think that, Ronald Reagan said, "Trust but verify." I think we have to do that with technology as well.
Right. Ginny, I had another question for you, or just a comment more. You were talking about the different levels of delegation and making decisions and so forth. I was in Huntsville just this past week and talking about the different levels of delegation when it comes to kind of say program management and leadership. And right, there's I'll say a more tactical approach where you just delegate, the individual tasks or the responsibility, I guess, if you will, that task. But then there's gradations of delegation levels where you can delegate the leadership and kind of the ownership end to end of an entire process or that execution, right? And the people leadership, the conclave, it seems like they took on the overall end-to-end leadership responsibility. But as leaders, right, and we typically have these different phases or types of delegation we can offer. And I think that as we grow our benches and our organization, sometimes we have to make sure that we float between the different levels and what's right for individuals, within the context of our organization. More of a comment that I wanted to offer, but definitely.
Yeah, and I think also the message there is, though leaders manage organizations, leaders manage teams, there's a very individual relationship that's required to understand the individuals on your team, what their capabilities are, and so forth. So
that's right. That's right.
You can't lose sight of that.
Right. I agree with that. Okay, so I think.
Hey, Tim. Hey, Tim. Before you close it out, I just want to reference some of the stuff you said. There's a wonderful book out there. I think it's very short. It's 10 stories great leaders tell, and it's you should be able to tell your origin story, a sales story, a cost-cutting story, a recruiting and retention story. And I just want to make the linkage to what you're saying. I mean, obviously you can trigger these in somewhat with AI, but to make the stories really interesting, maybe you are using analogs in the history of fiction to make them come alive in areas that we all know about. So thank you for that thought, Tim, because it's probably more fun to hear about Frodo than the fact that we didn't make our delivery this week. So there you go.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
I totally agree.
All right, friends, as we close out today's conversation, a huge thank you to all of our speakers for bringing their bold ideas, all of their sharp insights, and just the right amount, I'd say, of curiosity and quirkiness to the table. If today sparked something for you, check out the Future Skills Academy. Our instructors here have lots of great information brought to you by the Caltech Executive Education, where curiosity really isn't just encouraged, it's required. Now, this Memorial Day, we pause to honor those who gave everything so that we could keep asking questions, keep chasing better answers, and keep building the future they fought to protect. Now, innovation, leadership, and bold thinking aren't just business buzzwords. They're part of the legacy we're lucky to carry forward. Wishing you a safe, meaningful holiday. May your reflections be deep, your gratitude be large, and your next big idea honor the spirit of courage that came before us. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe, stay grateful, and as always, stay a little quirky.